So, we've just wrapped up talking about how and why you made it through some of those news leads that we had assigned from the last week. Now, let's talk about how you can translate that into writing your very own news lead. I like to call it a Hey Martha lead. And no, I didn't coin the phrase Hey Martha, even though I wish I had. But in a couple of seconds, we're going to meet the journalist who did. But first, why fuss over that very first sentence? Now, we all learned how to write a comprehensive thesis type sentence in high school and in early college level classes. That's an essay sentence. A news lead isn't an essay. Here's how William Zinsser put it in his book called On Writing Well. The most important sentence, he wrote, in any article is the very first one. If it doesn't induce the reader to proceed to the second sentence, your article is dead. Here's a look at the woman who coined that magical phrase, Hey Martha! This is Edna Buchanan. She is the best crime reporter I have ever followed. She won a Pulitzer Prize covering racism and riots for the Miami Herald. And actually, I recommend you get her book called The Corpse Had a Familiar Face, because it really changes the view a journalist needs in order to cover crime reports from a more humanistic standpoint. But here's the meat of that phrase, Hey Martha. She once described a good lead as making a reader who is sitting having breakfast with his wife over the newspaper clutch his chest, spew out his coffee, and say, Hey, Martha, did you read this? Because it was written so extremely well and provided such a gripping intro to a news story. We're going to focus on three basic types of leads in the next few weeks. First up, hard news. Who knows the definition of hard news? You're right. It's where it comes down to facts, murder, tax dollars, those kind of things. Soft news, which, as you guessed it, is the opposite of hard news. We're talking feature stories, more human interest type things, and leads that are specifically written for a paper or a magazine. The difference there is that when you are writing for print, the reader can stop if they don't comprehend and go back and read. So it can be a little bit more fact laden, a few more words, but if you're writing for the ear, it needs to be briefer. And we'll get on to some of those things in just a second. For this class, we are going to focus on hard news leads. Some basic rules. Don't make your readers work too hard. That's also known as burying the lead. That's when you take the meat of the story, the reason why someone wants to read it, and you drop it all the way down. You take too long to make your point. Therefore, the reader cannot figure out relatively quickly what your article is about, and they cannot decide whether to continue reading. So they usually bounce. Secondly, does your lead contain too many of the five W's and H? Who, when, where, why, what, how? Too many of those, you jam it all into that first sentence, and you will overwhelm the reader or the listener. And then there's my personal favorite, and forgive me for putting this in there, but it is the most common response I usually have when I am reading some beginning journalists' leads, and actually some people who've been at it for a while. A no-duh lead. What's a no-duh lead? Well, it's used to describe a statement or an answer that is so obvious, it's not worth writing, it's not worth saying. Here's an example. If you think of one, pile on, because I really like this kind of give and take that we can get. It's very similar to what happens in a newsroom, actually. So here's an example of a no-duh. Drunk driving is bad. Or, another favorite, the internet provides an immense source of useful information. Or, today's digital landscape is moving fast. Really? You don't say? I can think. Don't tell me what is obvious. Just a couple of other lead no-nos as we get ready to craft our own. Don't start sentences with there is or there are constructions. It's not wrong, but similar to a question lead, it is not interesting. And I kind of take it as lazy writing that you can do better on. Don't imagine anything. We're not John Lennon. This isn't a Beatles song. So don't write things like, imagine where everything is recycled, or imagine how good it must feel to save a life, or imagine receiving $1,000 tip from your customer on Christmas Eve. Imagine that we retire this kind of hackneyed, worn out news writing. And finally, for heaven's sake, no cliches, no puns, because it doesn't do to be punny, and no cliches in a lead sentence, not one. Here's how the fine folks at Oxford Dictionaries take it. They wrote, and I'm just going to quote this, those kind of cliches annoy people and they may even create an impression of laziness or lack of careful thought. Some people just tune out when they hear a cliche. I know I do. And so they may miss the point you're trying to make, which is buried further in the story. So again, back to our friend Edna Buchanan. She actually wrote one of the best leads I think I've ever read. It is short and simple. You can see it on the screen. Gary Robinson died hungry. Now, why did she write that? Let me tell you the story about Gary Robinson that she later unveiled as she walked us through the news event. Gary walked into a Church's Chicken. He was hungry. He ordered a certain cut of chicken, a certain meal, and the clerk said, "Sorry, sir, we're out of that." Well, Gary was drunk, Gary was mad, and Gary bopped the clerk upside the head. So the clerk called police, Gary was belligerent, and police ended up shooting and killing Gary. Hence, Gary Robinson died hungry. Oh, tell me more. That's another great kind of Hey Martha lead. Here's one that I found that I really like. It's in a 1992 story from the Sacramento Bee, written by an author, a journalist named Sam Stanton. In the end, Robert Alton Harris seemed determined to go peacefully, a trait that had eluded him in the 39 violent and abusive years he spent on Earth. I'm going to bet you really are going to want to go on and read that. Hence, tell me more. And finally, I found this example of a staccato lead online in a news quiz. Some of this is a little wordy. I wouldn't use it for broadcast, but I'm going to read that very first sentence to you so you can hear it, because here's how it would be said on the news. Midnight on the bridge, a scream, a shot, a splash, a second shot, a third shot. This morning, police recovered the bodies of Mr. and Mrs. R.E. Murphy, estranged couple, from the Snake River, a bullet wound found in the temple of each. Now, I don't like the writing past that very first part of the sentence, the second shot, a third shot, because it's passive, and I would probably err on the side of making it much more active. But that staccato lead, that grips you. That is going to carry you through to the rest of the facts of the story. So here's the bottom line on the qualities of a Hey Martha lead. Keep it short, sharp, and simple. We don't want to go over 30 words in a lead sentence. 35 max. We want it active and strong. So what is the active voice? Anybody have an opinion on that? An active voice is when you twist the sentence around. Instead of saying, the dog had bitten the man, you write, the dog bit the man. It's short, sharp, and it twists the sentence around to where the choice is an active word. And really, the bottom line to all of this is good reporting leads the way for a good lead. If you don't know the underlying facts, if you haven't asked all the right questions, it is extremely hard to draft a lead that has all the qualities that we just talked about. Good reporters can write good leads because they know what their story is about. So, in the next couple of minutes, we're going to create. We're going to divide down into groups and do a group activity so that we can start to write the kind of leads that are, hey, Martha, and would make Edna Buchanan proud.